Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. And as always, we're always looking for interesting guests, and my guest today is someone who is a poet, a short story writer, and an author, and who has just returned from a tour of Ireland where she was promoting her book. So we are very happy to have with us today Lica C. Taylor, who is graced us with her presence, and we're going to talk about poetry and writing and the process of writing. So let's begin by giving us a little short bio. Tell us who you are and how you got engaged in the whole writing process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm an author from the Storrs Mansfield area, and I started writing at a very young age in high school. In fact, I won the National Scholastic Writing Award in high school, but didn't really do anything in the area of publishing until probably after my children were a little bit older. Then I started sending my work out, mostly poetry, getting in magazines, and had a couple of chapbooks, which are really short little collections of poetry put out by a press in Kentucky called Finishing Line Press. And then in 2009, my life kind of transformed because I won a fellowship that enabled me to go to Ireland. And I had met a writer at a writer's workshop conference on Cape Cod, actually, and she was from Ireland, and we really kind of hit it off, and I said, I'm going to apply for this fellowship. I won't get it because I never get anything, but if I do, would you work with me? And if I don't, maybe I'll find a cheap way to work with you anyway. But I got it, and it was a lot of money, and I rented a little stone cottage in what turned out to be a very bizarre, well, not bizarre, just a really out-of-the-way place. I didn't know. I just took it off, the internet. Beautiful town, but really far away from things. And we stayed there and wrote, and that became this book, which is called The Other Side of Longing. And the reason it's called that is because we used the Atlantic Ocean as our central metaphor. We wrote from both sides of the Atlantic.
Interesting.
So we tried to incorporate our various folklore and culture in each of our parts, and we each had 20 poems in here. And then we launched it in Ireland and in the United States and got to do a book tour all over the place, including Wisconsin and most of New England and a lot of Ireland. We were on a lot of radio shows in Ireland, which was wonderful. And the book did, I think, very well and was used in a UConn class and also cited for the Elizabeth Shanley Gerson Award, which is an honor where they bring in an Irish writer every year. You get a stipend, and they bring in an Irish writer, and we were honored with that in 2011. So we were given it jointly, and they used our book in contemporary Irish lit classes. We get to visit classes, and we got this award, which was really, really amazing. So it was very serendipitous, and that press, Arlen House, I got familiar with, and when I had a solo collection, I asked if they would be interested in it, and in fact they were. So I have stayed with Arlen House for another collection, which is a solo called Necessary Silence from 2013, and then my latest, Growing a New Tale, which is actually a book of short stories.
Wonderful.
And will be out in the United States in November of 2015.
Wonderful. How is it, I always think of poetry as being a solo kind of endeavor. So, and have ever been a poet, but I certainly like to read poetry. So what is it like to actually work with another poet in creating what is sort of does it feel like a collaborative effort?
We didn't collaborate on the poems per se. We wrote separately, because I think exactly what you said. I think her writing style, like my writing style, is we really need to be alone when we're writing. So we kind of went off in separate rooms during the day, and we would share at night, and usually in front of a turf fire, which was really lovely, because even in July it's cold in Ireland, usually cold enough for a fire. And the only time we actually wrote the same type of thing is one day we decided we were going to we were going to do sonnets. And they're completely different, but we each wrote a sonnet that day and then shared it. And so sometimes we had words that we would both use. We would decide that there'd be a word we'd both use. She was telling me some Irish words, and one of them I thought was really interesting. It was cockshut, which is like the cockshut hour is dusk. So we were both sort of put this challenge that we had to use it in a poem.
Right, right.
So we did. And it was really interesting, but we did write completely separately. So there are 20 poems from each of us. Geraldine Mills is the Irish writer. She's quite, you know, well-published Irish writer. She's won some awards, a good amount of awards. And her latest book is called Hellkite, which is another Irish word for a really difficult and pretty much bordering on evil woman.
Oh, okay.
So it was a bit of a risky thing to do as a woman, to write a collection of short stories that feature women who are kind of, each one is more evil than the last. Some of them are pretty difficult to imagine. So it's an excellent collection, and I'm actually teaching it in my college classes at Nichols College this semester. I have 2 fiction classes.
So you do some academic work. So why don't you tell folks, you know, where you teach and.
Sure. I teach at Eastern Connecticut State University. I've been there for 9 years now, teaching creative writing this semester. Usually just teach 1 class, sometimes 2. Sometimes I teach critical and creative thinking. And at Nichols College, I teach between 2 and 3 classes a semester. This semester it's 2, and they're both fiction. I have taught classes in gender roles, sex and power in the media, and I've taught expository writing. But I'm very delighted that I'm teaching 2 fiction classes. That's a lot of fun. So I am using Geraldine's short stories along with lots of other short stories this semester.
Right. How is it to make the transition from being a poet to being a short story writer? Is that a kind of because you think of poetry as sparse and it doesn't have to be short. I mean, you know, there's some massive books of poetry, but is it an easy transition? I mean, do you just wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm going to write a short story"?
No, actually, I think it's a difficult transition. And I'm going to sort of paraphrase Geraldine, but she once said to me, "Poetry is kind of like the work of the soul, and fiction is kind of the work of the imagination." Well, not kind of, it is. So when I'm writing fiction, I sort of suspend reality, and it's not my world. And as I started doing it, the more I did it, the more characters came to me, and I just love it. I'm completely hooked on it now. It's much more escapist, I think, than poetry. But my training in poetry, and I have an MFA in creative writing with a concentration in poetry and pedagogy. And I think that training really helped me to be sparse with language, and also to use metaphor and image, and to understand that I need to really develop that. And there is some braiding of the forms. One of my blurbs on the back speaks to that. The first story, which is actually going to become the novel it's a novel I'm working on. It's called Visible Wounds. That story does braiding of the forms. I have repeated lines in it, and I was playing around with how to weave in kind of a poetic sensibility into fiction. So I do think that it shows that I have training in that. I hope it shows. And I think some of the fiction I love the most really is very visual, makes good use of images, has sort of a resonance to it with language. And
who's your favorite novelist then?
Oh, I have so many. I love Colin McCann. I like Jhumpa Lahiri a lot. I like Colm Tóibín. And I like some of my Irish writers a lot. I really like Geraldine Mills's writing. I like Alan McMonagle. He's an Irish short story writer, one that I think is we're going to hear about, as I think Geraldine's going to get a bigger audience. Nuala O'Connor, who just made the transition to be published in the United States. She started with Arlen House, same press I have, and she's the author of Miss Emily, which is a new book that just is readily available in the United States about Emily Dickinson and her Irish maid. It just came out. She just actually was in New England doing her launch. So she's an Irish writer who is now going to be known to Americans in a bigger way. So.
Do you have an Irish background yourself?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
My husband does, but I do not. But the first time I went there, which was I think 2007, I just felt instantly at home. Like this is what I've been looking for. So I strongly suspect that we will be spending part of our year there in the near future.
Okay.
We pretty much go once or twice a year as it is, but I think we're going to spend longer periods of time. We're probably going to divide our time it just feels very much like home to us. And
Well,
we have
with climate change and cold, cold and hot, you'll be enjoying yourself there.
Yeah, it's still really cold. It was hard to come back to this because I just came back on Monday night, and it was really chilly there, and came back and we're in hot and humid.
Exactly.
So,
Would you like to read us one of your poems?
Sure. I'll read a poem from Necessary Silence, and that's this book right here. And this was kind of a lucky poem because it's a love poem, and I wrote it for somebody's wedding, and they're still married, and you never know.
Of course.
But what's cool about this poem is that I usually, when I write a poem for an occasion, which I don't do that often, I don't do much with it. I just kind of, think, oh, it's just a gift to these people. This one I sent out, and it was finalist in a really good award, and it did get published. So I kind of think of it as lucky that way.
Okay.
It's also lucky that they're still married. So, so it's called What Lovers Know. Touch, as if her rounded shoulder is an amber moon glowing under your fingertips. Listen to her voice as she moves toward you in the mountain of night. Your hands are stars that she will draw inside until you're both hot with brightness. Lay down memory for this flash across reason. You will call for her eyes and ragged ears as if they were children gathered round to comfort you. What you share cannot be undone by age or sorrow. Her name, her curtain of soft hair, remains within, turning like her whisper toward you. In the eventual darkness, this will be what matters.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice.
So that's in this book.
And that was inspired by your commission to do something about these two people getting married.
Yeah, I had sort of a little time period that I got asked to do wedding poems. I must have done 3 or 4. This is really the only one that kind of went anywhere outside. But I was thinking of these specific people. It was a second marriage later in life, and it's a little. I was really thinking about why we make commitments again later in life, and there's just different sweetness to it.
Okay.
So I tried to make it very specific because I know both people pretty well. So.
And how long does it take you to actually write a poem? Say that poem that you just read us.
Well, I wrote it a long time ago, so I don't entirely remember, but I can say my average is that every poem I write goes through an average of about 30 revisions, sometimes more.
Wow.
So it's not a short process. I know students always think, oh, you just write it, and there it is. It isn't, poetry's so short, it's so easy. It's maybe easy to get an initial idea, but the thing about poetry is every word has to justify its reason for being on the page.
Yes.
It really does. You just don't have any excess in a poem.
Right.
So if there's something that stands out that shouldn't be there, it's going to get cut pretty fast. And it sometimes takes a lot of reading aloud. For me, the reading aloud, and I do this with stories too, it's the only way I can see if things work.
Right.
I have to read it aloud. And if there's a word out of place, I'll pick it up.
You'll pick it up. You'll hear it and you'll say, not right, not right.
Yeah.
That's part of what people don't understand about the writing process, that it's rarely that you go pen to paper,
Computer.
finger to computer, voice to computer, that in fact the first go around is ever what becomes the final product, that revision, which is really sometimes can be boring, but required, because even when you write longer stuff, short stories, fiction, you do want, if not every word, certainly every sentence to belong. So it takes a time to do it over and over again until it's quite right. Do you, as a writer, allot yourself a special period of time every day to do your writing? Do you have a schedule, or as the moment comes to you?
I should. I'm pretty busy in my life, but I do have 2 days a week that are my writing days. So lately they've gotten kind of co-opted for other things, but Tuesdays and Thursdays I try to keep as sacred writing days. So in a perfect world I would write every day, because my friend Geraldine once said to me, and she's not the only one who said this, every day you leave writing, it leaves you for 2. when you access that part of your brain, it's not the part of your brain that's like driving in traffic and thinking you want some coffee and wondering if you paid the electric bill. It's a different part of your brain, and it suspends reality. So the more you dwell in it, the easier it is to access, and the longer you're away from it, the harder it is to access. So in a perfect world, I would write every day, and that is one of my goals for this school year. Once I just got back from Ireland, and once I get the swing of the semester, that I'll at least spend an hour a day. But on the longer days, I often can spend 3 or 4 hours. That's about my average. And then I go away. I do a retreat in January every year, like a 3-day. But sometimes I just go off season to a place like the Cape, like in January, get a cheap hotel room and just, isolate there for like a week if I can do it, like during intersession, because it's very inexpensive, and I'll get a kitchenette and I'll just write all day. So that I find that very useful. I have to go away by myself sometimes.
To pick up the, to be free of the distractions.
Yeah, I'm really distractible.
It's a life of distractions.
Yeah. And I love writing retreats. I don't know if you've ever done them, but I have been blessed with having 2 really great extended experiences. One in Ireland at the Tyrone Guthrie Center, and one in Vermont at the Vermont Studio Center, and that was a month. And that was phenomenal. Actually, the entire, beginning of about 6 or 7 of the stories,
the short stories,
were drafted at Vermont Studio Center when I got that month-long residency. So it is incredibly useful and an amazing gift to be able to do that when you can. Most of us can't step out of our lives for a month. It's a long period of time.
Interesting. I was inspired to, I've written nonfiction always, decades of doing that. So we were talking earlier, my background was in writing books on grants writing and fundraising, which I've done, which you do much more research than actually putting, writing. It just has to sound relatively coherent, and you skip the fluff and everything else that makes everything interesting. You try to be a little interesting, but much more trying to be informative. So I had what I started my writing in fiction was I just I had a job which allowed me to go to the local community college for free. So I have 2 master's degrees, so I didn't need to get another degree. But I thought, well, I saw creative writing at the local community college, and I was actually inspired by a teacher. A teacher can make a world of difference to you. And then, of course, you come week after week after week, and you have to have something to talk about and to read. So that became the beginning of my saying, oh, okay, all right, I could probably make this transition from nonfiction, boring, informative stuff that can get you lots of money, to, oh my goodness, just something to refresh the soul. So I was always a lover of mysteries. So I picked up a pen name, Anastasia Goodman. Anastasia because my character is Russian, and Goodman actually is my maiden name. So I put that together, and I created a mystery series about Sasha Perloff. So Sasha Perloff is an immigrant Russian Jew who comes to the United States and becomes a police officer in the beach communities of New York City, which include Brighton Beach, where there are a lot of Russians, and then Coney Island. And if you've ever been to Coney Island, once you leave the boardwalk, Coney Island is a pretty gritty place. And it has a lot of public housing, and I don't know if anybody's had the opportunity. Show Me a Hero, or it's a new HBO special about the controversy in Yonkers, New York, where I actually once lived, putting in public housing outside of the big projects concentrated in the low-income areas, and starting to spread it out into the more middle class and upper middle class areas. And that's what was a huge fight. And in my actual my professional background is as an urban planner. So I was always interested in this. So, long story, that's how I started. So my first book was Loose Ends, and it is about Sasha Perloff, and introduces him to the reader. And so I picked it up, and all of these are all going to be about Sasha Perloff. So then I produced that first one was Loose Ends, and the next one is Terror in Brooklyn. And it's just about a white cop, Russian immigrant, who actually patrols all of these beach communities, and Coney Island being the toughest because behind the glitter is some pretty nasty places where drugs and all kinds of other nasty things come on. So I was actually simply kind of one day, I'm not a police officer, I've never been a police officer, I know Brighton Beach and I know Coney Island, but it just sort of just came to me one day that I should create this character. So I'm curious, does it just sort of come to you? I mean, you said you were in the retreat, and when you're in retreat writing these short stories, is there a moment that you say, there's an aha moment that you say, I think I've captured what I want to say, or I have an inspiration for a story to write?
Yeah, it usually starts with a character. The characters just come to me. And Growing a New Tale, this collection that is coming out in November but came out in Ireland this week, features all of the characters, and they're all completely different. They all have some reason to seek renewal. That's hence the title, because I was thinking of the idea, the title story uses the idea of lizards and how if they lose their tail, they can grow a new one.
Yes.
And that's unique. So I was thinking this kind of applies to people. Sometimes people at different points in their life seek renewal or they reinvent themselves. And most of my characters have some kind of either trauma, sometimes a catastrophe, a great loss, and a reason to need reinvention. So it was pretty much that particular idea plays out through every story, but they're entirely different. Some are narrated by teenagers, some are elderly. There's one about a woman who can find missing people. There's another one about children in a witness protection program. They're really all over the place. I have two stories that are narrated by people that I would consider to be pretty mentally ill, but in very different ways. I think one is a lot more likable than the other. So it really is all over the place.
You want to read us just
a little
bit, a sampling of some of these obviously very diverse characters, but with this issue of renewal. I like that as kind of like a theme.
Yeah, it really is. So I'll read a little part of Growing a New Tale, which is the title story. So here we are, 10 years after the honeymoon, and him clomping across the Florida cafe in his steel-toed boots to find a seat near the front window, cluttered with taped-on flyers advertising church bazaars and yoga lessons. Outside, a few zinnias flapped their limp petals in the humid puff of air they call a breeze around here. He pushes over a stack of Time magazines and newspapers to make room for his macchiato, double order of bacon, and sketch pad. I sit on a cast-iron chair near the back by the espresso machine. On the wall, there's a painting of a woman in a gauzy dress kissing a man under a red umbrella, even though I swear it doesn't look like a speck of rain is falling. Her dress all billowy in the blue-white of those tiny flowers that dot fields back home in the Northeast. Kind of how it is with us. We prepare for rain when there isn't any. A damn hurricane or one of those funnel clouds that the airbrushed woman on TV with her breasts hanging out of her V-neck gives a 30% chance of hitting somewhere, tearing up roads and picking up pets and even cars. Sometimes 10 years can make a woman feel like life has caught her in a headlock and she's choking on the monotony.
Very nice, very nice.
So that's the opening story of Growing a New Tale.
Okay, and and without giving away the whole stories, do we get the sense that something is about to happen?
Something is about to happen, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't want to give away the...
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Because I think the whole thing with short stories is the characters must emerge by the end of the story different from how they were in the beginning of the story, much like a novel, that we want to know that there's some kind of evolution of the character. So absolutely, this character, will be different by the end of the story than in the beginning. You'll find out a lot more about them, this couple. And this story, as many of the stories, so a lot of these stories have been in magazines. That was one that was in a magazine.
Okay, all right. The process of, so you have to actually, there's a real art to short story, which is different than a novel, which is really quite different than poetry, is that you have a relatively shorter period of time to be able to give us, it doesn't have to be a narrative though, it doesn't have to have a beginning, middle, and end to be successful as a short story, does it?
Well, I guess that can look all different ways. I mean, when
Uh-huh.
I'm teaching fiction, I always say you need to have a plot, you need to have a well-developed character. Hopefully, you start with with something that's a hook, that's interesting. I write character-driven fiction, so I'm much more interested in the characters than I am in the action, which is very different if you're writing sort of action-driven.
Right.
And I always tell students about movies. What movies do you see? A lot of movies we see out there are action-driven. That's kind of what we're used to in our culture. But I'm much more interested in the character. So I guess they do have a logical beginning, middle, and end, but they can look all different ways. And often I start in the middle and pick up the history later. I think that's most common in my writing.
Oh, in your writing, yes.
In my writing. I think a lot of short story writers do that too. They start because the history bogs it down too much. So I would often start with something, happening, and then I'll pick up what you need.
Kind of not necessarily a flashback, but that the backstory.
The backstory
then becomes introduced to you slowly.
Yeah, because in order for you to root for the character or care about the character, you have to have enough backstory to know them a little bit.
Right,
yeah.
right.
So that becomes really important. She's got a bit of a backstory that you'll hear about, and you can understand why she finds herself here and why she's pretty disillusioned.
Now you write, your characters, they're certainly not exclusively female, or are they?
No. I have a lot of male, I have a story that's from the point of view of a male stalker.
Okay.
So yeah, I have a lot of male narrated stories. I have a male teenager story, kind of all over the place.
Right.
So, and some are first person and some are third person. So I don't always write in the I, sometimes I use he or she or character names. And that kind of happens organically, although I have had a couple that I've switched. It just, when I was doing revision, because much like poetry, you have to revise, and these went through so much revision.
Right.
And if I had another 5 years, they probably would have gone through more, because it just never feels done.
Complete, right?
Nah,
yeah, I just want to keep on
really.
doing the revisions,
Yeah.
right? Because that's it. I ask you that because Harriet Grayson, am writing novels, mysteries about a male detective. So it's Sasha Perloff, the president's daughter's named Sasha, but in the Russian world, Sasha is almost always a man. And usually short for Alexander, but it's not in my character. And people have asked me, they say, how can you write from the perspective of being a man when, in fact, you clearly aren't and couldn't have those experiences? And I think part of it is just knowing human beings and then just making some observations. So some physical things that might be true for a man, which might not be true for a woman, you can sort of just by observation kind of improvise and kind of figure out. Am I saying what you kind of feel as a writer as well?
I guess I think it happens organically that the character comes to me. So if the character is a man, then I try to get to know the character and say, okay, what would the character do in this situation? And some of them, honestly, they're not likable, and I'm not happy with their behavior.
But that doesn't.
They're compelling, and I have to write their
right.
story. They have a story to tell, and I'm. I know it sounds a little strange, but it's sort of like I feel like it's my charge to write their story, whether I agree with them or whether I think they're ethical, because some of them are honestly not ethical. I'm not in this business to write ethical characters doing wonderful things. As I tell my students a lot, if you fall in love, get married, have 2 kids, buy a house, that's a nice life, but it doesn't make a good story. We want trouble. We want conflict. That's what really makes a story.
And flawed characters. So my Sasha Perloff is definitely a very flawed, I call him an anti-hero. He sometimes does the right stuff, but he doesn't always do the right stuff. But you're right. If we were going to repeat boring lives, no one would want to be interested in reading our stories. So would you like to read us another,
sure.
maybe from, as we were discussing, is there one from the male perspective?
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that, but there is. I'd have to look that one up. This is from a male perspective. This is third person, but it's from the male perspective. That familiar shuffling sound could only mean one thing. Why did he bring the damn rifle to fire a warning shot? He climbed back in the truck, revved the engine a couple of times, letting out a cloud of exhaust. Then the door to the yellow shingled shed cracked open, and a dirty blonde head emerged. A blonde head attached to the body of what looked like a young woman. The year before Bessie died, Nick came home to help with the garden. When they opened up the shed, a family of skunks scattered, black and white tails raised, bright eyes menacing. So cute, Bessie had said before one of the skunks sprayed Nicky. He had to take a bath in tomato juice and burn his clothes in a fire they built in the backyard. In the early years, Bessie had prayed for another child, but the good Lord only gave them one. You know, our Nicky's wife is pregnant, Bessie. Gonna have a grandbaby. Planting vegetables to bring them, like you would have done. He imagined her smile and nod of approval. And I'll stop there.
Okay.
That's just a beginning from the point of view of this man who has obviously lost his wife and discovers a young girl in his garden shed. So there's quite a progression of what's going to happen, but I don't want to give it away.
On that one.
It's called Good Heart.
Good Heart.
Good Heart.
Is it difficult to come up with titles because you have many like poems and short stories versus one novel?
I love titles.
Okay.
It's something I struggle with more than others. I have, and some I'm really proud of. I mean, Growing a New Tale I really liked. I have a story called Earthy Top Note, which honestly is a bit of a tribute to my son who's a coffee snob. Oh, he really is. And he's taught me a lot about, cold pour and different, single origin and all this stuff. So this particular character has a thing for really fine espressos.
Okay.
So that's what that came from. But I thought it was great because it's a bit of an unusual story because it's narrated by somebody who is already dead. And I know that's been done before. I'm not the only writer to do that, but it just came to me that way. So that's how it played out. But coffee also plays a part in it.
Right, right. Well, Agatha Christie has a very famous mystery where you don't know till practically the last page that the character is dead. So, oh yes, that can be masterful, absolutely. A very interesting turn to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, Lovely Bones was one that was done that way, and I think of
yes.
Tobias Wolff, Bullet in the Brain, which, but I mean, my funny story about this story is I sent it out and I got a very nice letter from an editor who said, I can't publish a story where I already know that the character has died. I'm thinking, have you not read like Lovely Bones or Bullet in the Brain, where the title of the story tells you he's getting a bullet in the brain? He wouldn't title it that if it wasn't going to happen that way. And that's Tobias Wolff, and I've taught that story, and I think it's terrific, just terrific. So there is no rule about what you can't do. It's just you have to write it well, and hope for the best. But
Well, just because they're an editor doesn't mean they know things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can find other homes if that's not the right home. But I just thought that was funny because is some great fiction out there that is definitely playing with that idea. Certainly, it's not an original one.
Right. You don't have to be the originator. You can just come up with an interesting variation of it.
Yeah,
Absolutely, to get people's attention. So I'm not much of a short story reader, I must say, but I do like Alice Munro, and of course she is, to my knowledge, the only Nobel Prize winner in literature who has actually exclusively been a short story writer. And so when I had the opportunity to teach, I actually taught kids who were being homeschooled, but I taught them through a program at Three Rivers Community College. And so they were relatively young, 14, 15, 16. And I wanted them to read some short stories. So I gave them just a few of hers because I think that, first of all, if you know nothing, you might as well read what is accepted to be the best.
Oh, she's excellent. There's some really excellent short story writers out there. I think of Antonia Nelson I love. Have you read any of her?
No.
Wonderful short story writer. I mean, definitely one of my role models for the genre.
And in what way?
Because she can get so much complexity into such a short space of time. And again, there's not a wasted word. And I think, Colin McCann does occasionally do short stories, and his are like that too. Very tight, very suspenseful, many things happening. Just amazing. Yeah, I like her a lot. But I think that also some of the Irish writers, Colin McCann, Colm Tóibín, Geraldine Mills, Ellen McMonagle, these are people who's, Mike McCormick is another one, Irish writer, very, really unusual and just a great use of a narrative, a narrative voice in a short piece of fiction.
Right.
So they're kind of like almost like little epiphanies, they feel very complete. And then there's a subgenre, which I have, I think, 3 of in this collection, called flash fiction. And one of them won the Hugo House New Works Award. The directive for this award was to write something that takes place in the course of 1 hour, and it had to be under 1,000 words.
Oh.
So that would be flash fiction. So it's really 3 pages. It's called Mosaic. And I sent it off, and I thought, nothing's going to come of this. And then I won this prize, so that was pretty cool.
Do you want to read that, or read us the first page? Yes?
If you want.
Sure.
Yeah, I got to go out to Seattle and read with Meg Wolitzer. So that was pretty cool. And so it's kind of, a bit of a lucky story. So it actually wasn't originally in the collection, but I told my publisher that I won this award, and he said, "Well, get it in the collection."
Let's not waste.
Yeah, because it's a good credit to win an award.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is actually, I'll give you a little bit of background on this, and I don't know where this came from. I kind of never know where they come from, but it's I did go out to Oregon last spring break, and I did actually some reading a workshop there, and I was thinking about the Cascadia subduction zone, and there's a big New York Times, I guess maybe it's in the New York Times article about the possibility of a major earthquake in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if you read about that.
Yes.
So I was thinking about that because we were out in Florence, Oregon, which is right on the coast, and it's one of the big Cascadia subduction, and they have all kinds of earthquake evacuation, which people I met said, "Well, that's a joke because you can't get out. There's like one
You're
bridge.
Gone. You're fried."
Right, and if there's a tsunami, you have like 15 minutes. This is not like a hurricane where we can make days ahead preparation. It's a whole different game. So I started thinking about that, and that's where this came from. Mosaic. I strap my feet into the wobbly skates, pull up my yellow and black socks. On the drive to the park, the car in front of me has a bumper sticker that says "Right to bear arms." I need arms for counterbalance when I skate. In the summer, I reveal pale arms in my favorite lace-edged camisole. I've been lifting weights, going for definition. It's hard to live without arms, but I can sure imagine a world without guns. In college, I used to vomit up my breakfast, usually some sort of greasy molded potato and the kind of scrambled eggs that had been sitting in a warming pan for hours. My mother had run off with a guidance counselor from the middle school, and my father would call me every night after he'd had a whiskey or 2. "Hillary, what am I going to do?" "Take a class. Go to one of those meetups at the church," I'd say while I skimmed an Ibsen play or outlined my paper on Borges. "Nah, losers. What am I going to do?" Sometimes I composed a title for a country song, Whiskey Heartbreak Blues. I was 20. What the hell did I know about relationships? At that point in my life, my focus was sticking my finger down my throat so I wouldn't get a pudgy roll around the middle. I also went on pointless dates with men too young to be interesting. Rollerblading is a dying art, but I've always been about 10 years behind the trends. I didn't get a smartphone until last year, would sit in the coffee shop tapping out text by pressing the number until it got to the desired letter. It took 5 minutes to say "see you in an hour." Mostly I just said okay. No one but Kent texted me anyway. "You're like a 70s girl or something, hippie chick." He looked like he'd sprinkled too much cocoa on his cappuccino and neglected to dab at his upper lip, but was actually a failed attempt to grow a mustache. Our list of compatibilities included yellow curry, cats, Ibsen, and the color pink. I'd long ago replaced bulimia with weightlifting and teaching, leave the eating disorders to the young. Kent was the kind of skinny that required no maintenance, so he sniped at the heroin chic models on TV. Give the lady a transfusion. He would have hated me 10 years ago. At 30, I'm retro. Sunburst tie-dye, 2 different colored sneakers, rings on every finger, and dreadlocks. I'm fashion challenged, so I mix it up to make it seem intentional. No one at the university cares what I wear. I'm not on any administrative track, just made it to full-time last year. Kent is gliding down the asphalt as if his feet had permanent wheels. Hey, Hill, race you to the lake. I attempt a long stride, which is impossible in roller skates. My hot pink knee pads protect me as I hit the ground, straighten up and inch forward in a move that is graceful. It's Saturday. After 45 minutes of loops around the lake, we'll go to the Paper Crane coffee shop for espresso. He'll work on his dissertation, and I'll polish some poems to send to the better journals. We'll eat something, foreign, curry or pad thai. When the earthquake hits, I'm perfectly balanced at the end of our last run down the slight incline by the lake. Kent catches me when I fall, and we hold each other with a kind of urgency that feels both familiar and unfamiliar. And I'll stop there. So it's really only about a page and a half longer. So I was very interested in what happens at that point in the life of 2 people, interesting, hopefully quirky people,
Right.
when the earthquake hits.
Ah, okay. Your form of the doomsday event.
Yeah, but it maybe. I mean, it's, I'm not going to tell you whether they survive this or not.
Oh, that's right. You have to have, that's right.
Right. I mean, so you don't know. But if they do, and this is part of the growing a new tale, they will be different people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that trauma and loss and situations like that can really transform people. And so,
Do you read things like in a paper or in a journal or something, and that can inspire you to create a story, something true that you might see?
Not usually.
No?
No, usually I just make it up.
You make it up completely?
I make it up. I mean, I was thinking about the Cascadia subduction when I wrote that story, so that was on my mind. So that's pretty much where that one came from. But a lot of them I really do make up. I mean, I have a couple that are kind of very strange situations, and I couldn't even really tell you where they came from. My crazy imagination,
Right.
maybe something in my subconscious about it, but I really don't know.
Do you ever think about where am I going to get the next idea to write?
No, not usually. But I am really, kind of like, you like Murder and Mayhem and stuff.
Right.
And I'm very fascinated with sort of doomsday scenarios, not dystopian societies or anything. I
Right.
don't ever want to write that. But
Game of Thrones is not for you.
no, not that or Hunger Games or any of that. But more like everyday people who experience some kind of an event that will transform their life, whether it be disease or an earthquake or the loss. I have a story that really opens with the loss of a child.
Mm-hmm.
It opens with a reflection of the loss of a child. The loss of a child happened 10 years prior, but how it transformed this family is, not to be believed, except for if you've been through that, you would know that they
Right.
could never, ever be the same.
Right. It is, of course, a source of great fiction, the loss of a child. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's true. We as writers, I'm going to put myself into this umbrella of writers, actually get inspired by all kinds of things that you don't have to experience it yourself personally to be able to write it or write about it. Certainly, that's probably true for many great writers. And then but when you go and you teach writing, don't you often tell your students to write about something they know?
Sometimes. I mean, I tell them to observe, to be in the world, to eavesdrop, because characters are all around you.
Right.
And I mean, I have lifted sentences from hearing conversations. I was at a coffee shop once, and I heard a bunch of professors many, many years ago sort of kind of gossiping about the department, and some of it was just not to be believed. They think they live in a bubble and nobody can hear them. And I jot things down. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. There was a time before texting where people did that on their cell phone all the time. You'd be standing in line at the bank and somebody would be having a very personal conversation,
Right.
With their doctor or somebody, and
Right.
you'd be getting half and you could fill in the other half pretty easily. It doesn't happen as much because texting is more private.
Right.
But I would grab that and say, okay, I can fill in the rest of that story. But I am pretty fascinated with dire situations, it seems. I have a news story about a plane crash. So
No, well, as we mentioned, I mean, if you just had with ordinary people, even the book Ordinary People was about not such ordinary people.
Right.
That's the irony of the title, so that, exactly right. I mean, who would want to read about ordinary people? I mean, that's the beauty of reality TV is that it's supposed to be real, but it's completely made up. It may not be scripted to be made up, but it, in fact, nobody lives like that.
Right.
So, and that's the fascination. People don't necessarily, but people want to be able to, even if it isn't what their lives are like, they do need to have some kind of catch that holds them, even if it has nothing to do with them. How do you create that something to catch the reader's attention, even because they may think that you're writing about something that's not ordinary, but what is it that you can get that catch in there? What is it that brings
tension.
them tension? Okay.
Yeah, you have to create tension over and over again. I mean, I think short stories, like a novel, they play out in scenes. So each scene has to have some tension in it to get us to keep going to the next scene. So you can't know the outcome right away because you keep turning pages to find out.
Right.
Is this character going to make it? Is the character in the earthquake story, Mosaic, are they going to survive this? Where's her father now? Is he still a drinker?
Right.
And those things do get resolved mostly. I mean, I'm kind of fond of ambiguous endings or
Right.
open-ended.
Yes.
I feel that way with poetry, that a poem should open up at the end. So it's subject to more universality.
Right.
And I do feel that way with stories, and maybe that's my poetry training talking.
Yes.
But I think I tend to end with open endings where there's more than one interpretation of where it's going to go.
Okay.
I kind of like that. I don't like to tie it up neatly
Right.
for you. But I don't, if I throw tension out there, I do know that I have to have some sort of revolution or at least an evolution.
So the reader doesn't walk away dissatisfied. Right.
Yeah, or they just don't feel like one of my pet peeves, and I've had this happen, is reading a book, like a novel, a mystery, or a suspense novel, and there's a minor character that appears like once or twice and kind of goes nowhere. Like, you never really see them again. And I think, well, why are they there? It's like introducing a gun on the mantle. I think somebody once said this about it, or maybe it was Ibsen, that if you have a gun on the mantle in Act 1, you have to use it by the end of the play.
By the end of the play?
Because why is it there?
Right.
So, if you're going to do that and have this minor character that's agitating somebody or bouncing off of somebody, there has to be a reason for that character. Maybe it's to help your main character evolve in some way or reflect in some way, but they can't just be there for decoration. So, and that's tricky because we all use minor characters.
Absolutely. In my mysteries, we have all kinds of secondary and tertiary kinds of characters who come in. But as a mystery, you often go to different people to collect clues that lead you to the conclusions. Because, the books start out and it's a dead body. So who's responsible for is it murder? Is it just something that happened? So there's always that piece of it. And if people are interested in learning about Sasha Perloff, they can do so by AnastasiaGoodman.weebly.com is the website I created for the books. I also have a Facebook account for my character, so there's a Sasha Perloff Facebook page, and I put in there mostly pieces about Russia and things that are going on in Russia, because that's part of his character. Of course, modern immigrants, unlike my own family that came here at the turn of the last century, you go back and forth, especially if you have a little money. And the country that you came from is not in complete turmoil. It becomes very easy to go back and forth. So modern immigrants go home all the time.
Yeah.
And they bring with them the perspective of I live in America. I may have become a naturalized citizen, but most people, if they bother to go home, it's because they feel some yearning, either because people are still living there, or because they experience something and they're not ready to kind of let it go. And that's sort of part of my theme about being a modern immigrant. You're never too far away from home. I mean, even people who come, even these crazy poor Syrian immigrants, eventually they would probably like to go home and not live in Europe. So I think that's part of this character. So he has certain characteristics, one of them being this modern immigrant, and the other one also being an observer of life in America from the perspective of being a foreigner. And because he spent enough time in Russia, he can reflect on and understand the differences that are between our cultures. I mean, we sort of think about that, but immigrants become very good observers of what's going on in this country, because it's not always quite the same. Even you think about Canadian immigrants. You think America, Canada, exactly the same thing. Well, it isn't.
It isn't. No.
It isn't. It isn't at all. And they actually resent that. You think that they are like we are, and they're not. But I've gotten something so far off from Canada. You think Russia, right? And so I've also introduced historical characters into the books who are real people. So a minor character in Loose Ends is President Putin of Russia.
I was going to say, do you have Vladimir Putin? Is he riding bareback?
And it's part of the thing about being in him. And the interesting thing is, it's written 10 years ago. He was a president 10 years ago, and he's president again.
Yep.
So it doesn't actually change much. I've created a character that's a piece of again, not my life, just as some of your characters have nothing to do with your life. So he is a Russian immigrant, and I've made his mother a Jewish dissident. And he is the grandson of the hero of the Battle of Stalingrad. So I introduced Stalingrad into it, and he was obviously not there. His mother was, and was a survivor. But in fact, you meet people along the way who, in Russia, and I have been to St. Petersburg, Russia.
I was going to ask you if you've been to Russia.
You know, when you go there, they say, without equivocation, that the Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point for the war, and they meaning the Russian people, made the great sacrifices that actually destroyed the Nazis and Hitler. They believe, to this day they believe, that they were the ones who saved the world from the Nazis, and not what happened, not the British, not the Americans, that they and the great sacrifices that they made, 20 million dead, were the great savers of humanity. And interesting enough, which gets to the idea of Putin, this short little man who was in the KGB before he was the president, is that what you don't give Russia, which is what's going on in the world, is respect. And that is also very popularly felt, and this is before the current crises that we have with Russia, that you go there and they think, number one, nobody takes them seriously about what happened during the war, and number two, nobody takes them seriously now. And that a lot of stuff, it's like a little kid acting out. They don't think they've gotten enough RESPECT, and so they become bullies in a sense, and they kind of act out. And part of the psychology of what's going on in the world is perhaps based on that kind of thing. So that's my that's my characters. So tell me, are you going to have any readings coming up that my audience should know about?
Sure. Yeah, I actually am doing a fiction workshop on Bank Square Books, which is out this way in Mystic, and that is on November 12th. I believe it's up on their website, and people can register for it. The cost of the workshop is $25, which includes a copy of Growing a New Tale. So, and I put it as a Facebook event. Obviously, in today's world, we're all social media aware, so I am up on Facebook. I have a writer page on Facebook, as well as just a regular Facebook page. And I do list my events there, and also on my website. So that one is coming up on the 12th, and on the, actually, Wait, I might be wrong on the date on that.
Okay.
Actually, I think it's the 15th. I'm sorry. I have another reading on the 12th, which is in Dudley, Massachusetts. So it's the 15th, and the 14th of November 2015 is my official launch for the book.
Okay.
And that is a public event that will be at Mansfield Library Buchanan Center in Mansfield, Connecticut, and that will be at 3 o'clock.
Okay.
3 o'clock. It's a weekend, and I believe it's a Saturday. And there will be surprises. There'll be a giveaway. There'll be some, kind of a light atmosphere, and there will be refreshments, because I'm big on refreshments on book launches. You need refreshments.
Right, exactly.
Can't have wine in the library, though. I mean, in Ireland, when I had my launches, we had wine and
Irish whiskey.
Yeah, they didn't have whiskey. They just had wine,
Okay.
but wine and soft drinks and that sort of thing. But I can't do that at the library, but I will have refreshments. And again, that's Saturday. I believe that's the 14th of November, and it is Growing a New Tale official U.S. book launch at 3 o'clock at the Mansfield Library Buchanan Center, which is a big room off the library.
So you have your website here, so people can go on there and double check and make sure that you got the right dates and the right places. But for people to be aware of these things that are going on for you, Lisa C. Taylor, and we have to have the C in there because otherwise people won't find you on the internet because there's too many Taylors.
There probably are too
many. Yes, thousands and thousands.
That's why I used my middle initial. But yeah, if you go under events on my website, there are a whole bunch of them in November. I'll be in Lebanon at the Jonathan Trumbull in December. I think it's December 15th. I'll be all over Massachusetts. Reading in the Dudley Library. There's one in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So I'm kind of going to be all over.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing with us your poetry and your short stories. And we wish you a tremendous amount of luck and success in your endeavors and the novels that are coming out of your head that will be published sometime in the near future, we hope.
I hope so.
Yes, definitely. So I want to thank Lisa for coming, and definitely check up on her website. And you can always check on myAnastasiaGoodman.weebly.com if you're interested in my other life as a mystery writer. I also want to make you all aware that we here at SET TV, which is a nonprofit, we are holding our first, and we hope not our last, art opening. We have beautiful artwork displayed in the studio. They will be for display and for purchase. We will have light refreshments and entertainment here. I want you to keep that date, September 17, starting at 5:30 here in our studios in Groton. Please, everybody come on board. It's co-sponsored with the Mystic Chamber of Commerce. So we want you to come. We want you to come and see our beautiful art and to praise our artists, many of whom will be here, and to pick up your early Christmas present, which is a long-lasting piece of artwork. So this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.